Good evening. In Module 1, we looked at the fact that the human population is currently undergoing an explosive growth, and that may very well be reaching the carrying capacity of this planet to sustain the human population. If we are to avoid extinction, we're going to have to deal with two issues. Number one, getting a handle on slowing down and hopefully leveling off the rate of human population growth. And number two, helping to sustain the Earth's ability to provide the resources necessary to support the population that we have on the planet. In the first few modules of the course, we spent time looking at how the Earth provides the resources necessary to sustain life. And specifically, we looked at something called an ecosystem, how the ecosystem produces resources, how it recycles nutrients within those resources, and how it helps to clean and sustain the Earth in general so that it can continue to produce resources. In the next few modules, we looked at the issue of human population growth, and specifically the factors that are driving that growth and what might be done in order to help curtail the growth. And we saw that one of the key issues there is the fact that if we can improve the affluence and well-being of all people on the Earth, that we can in fact begin leveling off the human population growth, much as it has already occurred in many developed countries. In Chapter 12, we're going to look specifically at the issue of food production and distribution, and how technological advances are allowing us to produce even more food on the planet, to squeeze out even more resources from the available ecosystems that we have on Earth, and to look at the issue of food production into the future. And interestingly enough, we will see that at least right now, there is no shortage of food on Earth. But the problem is that the food that is being produced is not necessarily getting to the people who need it the most. And that is a function not of the inability of the Earth to function, but of the inability of human governments to function. Back in Chapter 8, we read about the fact that humanity has gone through a number of different revolutions that have affected its ability to survive and grow on planet Earth. One of the earliest revolutions was the Neolithic Revolution, during which time man learned how to both grow food in the ground and domesticate animals for both food and for labor. And for much of humans' time on Earth up until recently, he grew food on the Earth using basic implements, such as we see in this diagram accompanying my narration, in which animals were used for labor and simple primitive tools were used to help cultivate the ground. And this was sufficient then to allow farmers to provide food for themselves and their families. And in fact, the United States itself, up through the mid-1800s, was nothing more than, for most of its area, a collection of family farms. And that is basically the way agriculture was handled up until the last century or so. But then we went through another revolution, the Industrial Revolution. And with the Industrial Revolution, we learned how to create machines that were able to do the labor of dozens, perhaps even hundreds of people in the past. And these machines, along with other technological innovations such as pesticides, fertilizers, and things of that nature, have allowed man to tremendously increase his ability to grow food on ever less land, thus helping us to be able to stretch out our resources and, in fact, allow only in the United States 3 million farmers to feed over 300 million people within the United States and still have food left over to export to the rest of the world. A significant difference from the way humanity operated up until the last 100 years. One extremely important development in the last 50 years is something called the Green Revolution. Back in the 1930s, the United States was asked to try and help to do something about the growing problem of hunger in Mexico. And one of the approaches that was used to deal with that issue is to look at varieties of wheat that could be grown in the harsh climate of the land of Mexico. Initially, American scientists attempted to take the high yield, high growth rate varieties of wheat that are grown in the Midwest United States and transplant them down into Mexico. However, that didn't work again because of the harsh sun and the high winds served to basically decimate the kinds of hybrid varieties of wheat that we have here in the United States Midwest. So what they did was they looked around for native plants, native wheat plants in Mexico to see how they survived and how they functioned. And what they found was that the native wheats in Mexico were much hardier and able to survive the sun better, and were much thicker and able to survive the wind better. The only problem was is they didn't produce a lot of grain. They could not produce sufficient amounts of wheat to sustain the population of Mexico. And so what American scientists did is they hybridized the native wheat forms in Mexico with those of the ones in the Midwest that were high yield. And as a result, they were able to produce a new hybrid form of corn that was strong enough and hardy enough to grow in Mexico's harsh climate, but at the same time productive enough to produce enough wheat to help sustain Mexico's need for food. And as a result, in less than about 20 years, Mexico was able to triple its output of wheat and thus bread and other grain products, helping to stave off an imminent famine that was going to occur in Mexico. The whole process was so successful that it was repeated again in India. And again, within 20 years, the ability of India to grow wheat tripled, and they were able to feed their population much better than they had before. So this simple, relatively simple technique of cross-fertilizing different forms of wheat from different parts of the planet to get the best qualities of these different varieties of wheat so as to maximally produce wheat for indigenous peoples in developing countries was extremely successful. So successful, in fact, that the inventor of this particular wheat was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In the last 20 years or so, we've undergone yet another revolution being termed the gene revolution. This gene revolution is a result of advances in human understanding of biotechnology and the function of the genes that exist within the DNA of all living things. With the gene revolution, scientists have been able to actually transfer the necessary traits of one plant or animal into another plant or animal in order to derive a maximal benefit. With the green revolution, scientists were limited to simply hybridizing or cross-fertilizing members of the same species of plant, because only species can breed true offspring, as we saw in an earlier chapter in this course. With the gene revolution, scientists were able to actually transfer the genes for a given trait from one species into an entirely different species. And in doing so, scientists have been able to create new varieties of plants and animals with traits that help them to better survive. In some cases, scientists have been able to transfer traits from one species to another that help them survive drought, or help them to avoid or eliminate pests, or to survive in harsher conditions than they normally would. The accompanying slide that we have here shows one rather remarkable application of genetic transfer applied to one of the staple grains of the entire world, namely rice. Most Asian peoples' diet consists primarily of rice, but unfortunately, rice lacks a lot of nutrients that are necessary for good health. One of those nutrients happens to be beta carotene. Beta carotene is the precursor to vitamin A, and vitamin A is crucial to maintaining good eyesight and good immune system health. And without beta carotene, many people, particularly Asian peoples, were subject to blindness and many types of diseases. In order to overcome this problem, scientists were able to transfer the gene for beta carotene, which naturally occurs in carrots, into a variety of rice and incorporate it right into their genetic DNA, so that when the rice is eaten, it now is able to provide beta carotene to the people who are eating it. So scientists were able to actually create a variety of rice that it was capable of directly providing the necessary nutrients that the people who eat it needed, um, simply by transferring the gene to make beta carotene from carrots to rice. One of the interesting side effects of that transfer, however, is that the gene that codes for making beta carotene also codes for some of the orange color of the carrot. And so these new varieties of rice not only made beta carotene for the purpose of producing vitamin A, but the beta carotene also gave a yellow golden hue to the new variety of rice, and hence it was coined the name golden rice. Scientists also attempted to, and successfully so, transfer the gene for transportation and holding iron within the rice, so that the rice could also deliver greater amounts of the mineral iron. And through various cross-fertilization and genetic manipulation, they were able to create an even more golden variety of rice that provides both beta carotene and iron. So through this new gene revolution, scientists are able to significantly enhance the ability of crops to grow in adverse conditions, so that land that normally would not be useful for growing food can now be used to grow food, as well as the ability to provide that food with more nutrients, so that it is better for overall health and well-being of the people who eat it. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, the Green Revolution, and in particular the genetic revolution, our ability to produce food has grown tremendously. In fact, in this graph accompanying my narration, we see on this bottom line the rate of human growth over the last 20, 35 years versus the rate of production of both meat as well as grain. As you can see, the rate of our ability to increase food has outstripped the actual increasing population of the planet Earth. So through technological advances, the fact is that we do not actually have a shortage of food on the planet right now. Our problem is more due to the fact that the food cannot necessarily get to the places it needs to go, as well as the fact that the food, because of the cost of some of these advances, has become significantly more expensive, thus making it unavailable to some of the very people who need it most. So, despite all these improvements in our ability to grow and produce food, nevertheless, 20% of the world's population still goes to bed hungry every night. Two-thirds of those people exist in Asia and Africa. And of those people, almost 50% of the children under the age of 5 are underweight as a result of hunger. This is such a problem that the United Nations has included in its Millennium Development Goals, which we talked about earlier, the goal of reducing by at least 50% the number of children who are underweight in these countries. And then finally, we see that the root cause of hunger in the world is, again, poverty. And so the ability of humanity to address the world's problems of hunger and poverty will not only help to make the world a better place, but also help us to reduce the rate of human population growth, which benefits everybody.